parable he put forth to them, saying, The kingdom of heaven is like a mustard seed, which a man took and sowed in his field, which indeed is the least of all the seeds. But when it is grown, it is greater than the herbs and becomes a tree, so that the birds of the air come and nest in its branches.
The listeners who heard Jesus weren't concerned really with heaven. They had their understanding of the whole heaven and hell thing from a Hebrew standpoint. Their question was not about heaven, it was about the kingdom. The kingdom of heaven is like, the question on their mind was, Jesus, if you're the Messiah, when will you restore your kingdom? When will you restore your kingdom? And for them, the kingdom, of course, at the time was this spiritualized version of Israel back to the golden day, probably of Solomon. That's kind of what they were thinking. So what does Jesus do? He goes through this cluster, this list of parables that reshapes their entire concept of what it means to be the kingdom of God. The kingdom of heaven is like. And we live in a faith community very different from the one Jesus spoke to, but it's still very much the same situation. We get obsessed with the idea of this location of heaven, this idea of how bad can I be and still get in, How good do I have to be? A central part of the whole evangelistic thrust, not that it's a wrong question, but we grab people with the question, if you were to die tonight, where would you go? It's a valid question, but the focus is to this place after. This idea of this surreal location, this place called heaven. When Jesus communicated in the parables, it's just as much for our day, because you know what? We need a serious reshaping of what the kingdom of heaven is like. He needs to correct our concept. If anything is consistent with humanity is we're just brilliant on getting God wrong. We're just really, really good at it. The highest priority for the kingdom citizenship isn't how good or bad we are to enter someplace, but whether we're spiritually alive or dead right now. The motivation isn't to where you're going after death. The motivation is, where do you sit in the kingdom? What's your native homeland right now? The whole idea of the Gospels, from the Gospels to Revelation, it makes it clear, heaven isn't this place. Heaven is a presence. You know what makes heaven heaven is that God is present there. That's what makes heaven heaven. What makes hell hell is God is not there. You are cast out of his presence, or you were ushered into his presence. It's all about presence. But here's the thing, you're sitting here right now. Why did you come to church this morning? Hopefully so you could be in the presence of God. At least as much as we can be in this corporeal life. So if we're not in any type of presence now, why would we even expect to be in his full presence later on in some place that we refer to heaven? No, it's a kingdom that's going on right now. If we don't get this right, forget later. It starts now. The parables are not about heaven. They're about the kingdom of heaven, which heaven is just a part of that. As the parables read through Matthew 13, most of them are a point of delineation. There is this idea the kingdom of heaven is God working heavenly in earth. It's like a field, and you're a wheat or you're a tare. It's a seed on the ground, and you accept the seed or you don't accept the seed. It's like a dragnet. You're a catfish or you're a tilapia. It's like a treasure. Everybody wants it, but only one man finds it. So we find this delineation going on, and if that was all the parables, we'd really get the impression you're in or you're out. You're either favored by God or you're not, and that's that. But we know that doesn't work. We run into problems because we were all out. We were all tares. We were all catfish. We were all hard ground. We were all these things. We all fell short of the glory of God. We all were not worthy. We were all enemies with God, and at just the right time, He died for us. So there's another qualifier that has to come in here besides this standard of you're this or you're that. And Jesus does this interesting thing. You have this cluster of 7 teaching parables and an 8th command at the end. But you have these, and right in the middle of them, right where it goes from the public address to the private address, He changes the focus to something else. He moves from delineation to transformation. From delineation, from that line in the sand, you're this or you're that, to transformation. And in a few sentences, He tells 2 profound parables. 2 profound parables that only tie up about 4 sentences, maybe 2 sentences each. One, the first, dealing with the mustard seed, deals with transformation and growth outward. And then the leaven deals with transformation and growth inward. There's so much crammed into these few sentences that we can only deal with one of those today. As a matter of fact, we try to set up the overall context on the Friday webcast so we could deal with application on Sunday. And we'll barely scratch the surface of everything that's said in just these 2 sentences. Now, regarding both of them, just before, because we're going to move just into the mustard seed alone, but regarding both the mustard seed and the leaven, there was a mystery in there that, I'll be honest, it took me a while to kind of figure it out a bit. It's because here you have this vital thing of transformation, this thing that you must be transformed. There must be this type of positive birth and growth. But Jesus takes 2 negative symbols to show positive growth. Negative symbols for the positive growth. You say, why did He do that? Why did He do it? You know, even take the mustard seed, that there was in rabbinical teaching that mustard seeds, you didn't even plant mustard. It was like asking people not to plant dandelions. This stuff was just growing all over the place. And leaven symbolized contamination. It was frowned on. That's why to this day we'll have communion. Do you ever wonder why we have those wonderful little wafers that are in there and not some of B's tasty bread or anything? It's because leaven is, to this day, considered spiritually a negative thing. It's a contamination. So we have unleavened bread. That's what we use. That's what the Jewish people did. But here's Jesus taking these negative symbols and using them to illustrate this not just positive thing, but vital. This vital thing of how you grow so you can live through eternity. Why did He take the negative? I think it really comes down to this. Some people will say, well, it was shock value. If you use that negative, then Jesus did this twist, and then you'll remember it. I'm not saying that's not wrong. But I'll tell you, I think this is why He used the negative, was to purposefully take our value system and do this. It's to take what we think is good and we think is bad and turn it right upside down. And we understand that, God sees things differently than we do. And then if this transformation is actually starting to take place in you, somewhere in your experience, somewhere in your life, there was a time that what you thought was good, God has turned it upside down. If your value system, this If anything, hear this. If your value system has never been turned upside down, you don't know Jesus. You may know of him, but you are yet to experience him. There will be some point he will turn what you think you know right upside down on its ear. That's part of the transformation that goes on. And so he uses a mustard seed. And it's a challenging thing, really, when you look at it, because even to the listeners at the time who were intimately familiar with all kinds of mustard plants, we covered it on Friday with 4 different main categories that were involved there. But the mustard plant contained vitamins and antioxidants that could be lifesavers for people, and yet it was an invasive weed. The mustard plant is banned by some rabbis, but yet it's used in the pickling spice for those good fish we talked about in the dragnet a few weeks back. The mustard plant grew deep roots that were the water of life for some desert animals that were in that environment, and yet it spreads uncontrollably and causes all kinds of trouble. The mustard seeds can sprout in the harshest conditions, and yet they are coated with a very special germinating inhibitor, so they will not germinate until just the right time. Mustard seeds, mustard plants, they can be huge, they can be small, they can be valued, they can be a nuisance, they were hated, they were loved, they were just defying description or categorization. You just can't give a generic description of mustard seeds. Kind of like the kingdom of heaven, isn't it? The secret of mustard seeds, of the mustard plants spreading and being unstoppable, all starts with one big secret: a tasty little seed. So it might be a brown seed, it might be a white seed, it might be a black seed. But these tasty little seeds are so small they're carried on the wind, or even better, eaten by birds. We know what happens when birds eat seeds, because we all have had our cars in a parking lot somewhere. Birds are just great for spreading seeds everywhere, aren't they? They just scatter them around. Well, here's an interesting thing. One of the biggest points Jesus was making in the parable of the mustard seed was not just something small to huge, but it was unstoppable in its growth. It went everywhere. It was a scattering of seeds. In the first century, if you live in the book of Acts for a while, you know about the great persecution that broke out among those Hebrew Christians and the first generation of them. And what happens in persecution? They were scattered. And when they were scattered, they took the seeds of Christianity all over the Roman Empire. Does just for kicks, anybody know what there was a Greek term that's used to describe that scattering of the first Christians? Anybody know what the word is? It's Ron, I'd give you my cup of coffee in honor. The actual pronunciation of the word was diaspora, and he got it. And the thing is, it's a compound word, diaspora, and the word literally meant from or through scattering seeds. So diaspora means through scattering seeds, just like a mustard plant. Isn't that interesting? It could be that this parable that we see as a parable was prophecy at the same time. Isn't that something? As Jesus is explaining to them the parable of the mustard seed, he's telling them in a kind of a coded way what's coming down the pike very shortly. The genetic information that's tucked away in a seed is incredible. A mustard seed is particularly incredible. It has all kinds of DNA stuff going on in there, but it doesn't hold a candle to what Jesus tucks away in 2 sentences of a parable. It's prophetic, it's descriptive, it's teaching. And there's 4 items to cover in there. I just want us to kind of breeze through 4 of the main objects of this. What does he talk about in these 2 sentences? He talks about vegetation. He talks about a man sowing. He talks about a field. And he talks about birds. And if we can glean even half of what he's telling us about each of these 4 things and how they interact, you will have a glimpse into exactly what the kingdom of heaven is like. You will start to understand what God's kingdom is all about. So that's worth a look, I'd say. Well, let's start with the man sowing. Let's start there. The man is the Son of Man. Jesus never describes himself any other way. The only label he puts on himself through all the Gospels is the Son of Man. Did you ever wonder why? Ever wonder why? I thought I knew, and the deeper I dug, I found I only half knew. You might have got this far, you know that he's referring to a very accepted, very looked towards vision of Daniel. Daniel 7:13-14 reads like this, "And behold, the clouds of heaven, on the clouds of heaven there came," well, even before I go any further, coming on the clouds of heaven, who does that sound like? I'll just take a sip of coffee and wait and see if it strikes a note. Jesus. It sounds like Jesus. Are you sure, Sherry? Sounds messianic, isn't it? So obviously in Daniel's vision, we're dealing with a messianic prophecy. It's a Jesus prophecy. "And behold, with the clouds of heaven there came one like a son of man, and he came to the Ancient of Days, and was presented before him." The Son coming before the Father. "And to him was given dominion and glory and a kingdom, that all people and nations and languages should serve him. His dominion is an everlasting dominion, which shall not pass away, and his kingdom one that shall not be destroyed." Obviously, the whole messianic plan that we come to know in the New Testament. But even in the same vision, Daniel also uses this term this way. Daniel 8:17, "So he came near where I stood." So Daniel, just a man, talking in the first person. "And when he came, I was frightened and fell on my face. But he said to me, 'Understand, O Son of Man, that the vision is for the time of the end.'" So the Messiah figure is referred to as Son of Man. And yet Daniel, who's just a mere human, is referred to as the Son of Man. There's 2 polar opposites to the use of the term. And basically, in our time, we've come to know it under this word. Here's a fancy word for you you can amaze your friends with. Hypostatic union. And all that really means in that original Greek is this, is Jesus was fully man and fully God. Jesus was fully man and fully God. And every time he referred to himself as the Son of Man, he was telling people, whether they realized it or not, he was fully man and fully God. So the man who is sowing in the field is the Son of Man, and he has seed, which, let's say it brings us to the field. And I think we all kind of get this. Well, the field's the world. He's coming and sowing his seed in the world. And we can take that in a whole bunch of levels, can't we? There's a physicality to the world. I'm looking at you. You're looking at me. We see each other. There's a pulpit. This is the only time I get to thump the pulpit. Don't get to do that much. But I feel it. It's a physical thing. We're in a physical building. So there's a physicality to the world. But there's also the situation. Right now, we're sitting in this place. All of us are in some situation or multiple Some of us are feeling well today. That's our status. Some of us maybe are tired. Some of us are hot. Some of us are cold and have blankets on. There's different things going. There's a situation. Some people are worried about that Chinese balloon that came over the country. Some people are worried about the Ukraine. There's a situation going on. That's the condition of the world. So the field is the world. It's a perfect parallel. If we were to ask Kevin, I'm sure you check the condition of your field. Does it need new nutrients? Does it need to be plowed or whatever? There are things going on. There's a condition and a status of your field before you can plant. So the world is all of these things. It is the place where we exist. We exist in the moment, in this reality of a physical world. So the Son of Man comes to this field. He's not from the field, he's from somewhere else, but he comes to the field. He brings heaven to the field. And heaven's in the terms of what he has. He comes with an explicit purpose. He just doesn't come to cruise around the field. He comes to sow a particular seed in the field. In this case, the mustard seed, which would have been really weird to the listeners of the time who heard this. So he brings this seed. And what are seeds? They are DNA packets. And the thing about a seed, it only grows the DNA that's in there. If I bring a mustard seed, I will not grow an apple tree. If I bring an apple tree, I will not grow a mustard plant. The idea is it will grow and blossom into the life form that it is. And we're talking a mustard seed. There's a whole bunch of healthy things about mustard plants. They did grow them, but they hated them because they would grow everywhere. So it was this love them, hate them. And here he is planting these in the field of their world. Okay, what is the Son of Man actually planting in this field, that's world? Well, the vegetation, like we said, it starts with the seed. The seed's the reality. Any farmer will say, I'm not sure it'd be interesting to know, Kev, I have no idea what farmers pay for all the seed they buy. But I know you spend a lot of money because the seed is the reality of the plants. Is that when you buy a good corn or soy or whatever, you expect plants, this is just the beginning form of it, but you expect the reality of those plants to grow, to form, to manifest. And that's what's going on here. He is planting something that will sprout. Can you imagine a mustard seed in a field? You would never even know it was there. It would be so tiny, it would be lost, insignificant. It's a concrete reality, but nobody even knows it's there. And then it does what it's designed to do. Now, we mentioned a bunch of different mustard plants, and I'm sure you're familiar with them. It's pretty sure that Jesus was talking about a particular mustard called Salvadora persica. And the thing about this plant is it grows into, technically you would say a tree, or you would want to say a tree, but technically it's not, because it's as wide as it is tall, which makes it a shrub, I guess, even though it goes from 0.1 inches to 25 by 25. And it'll do this, apparently, in about 3 months. It'll grow into this huge tree. Where there was nothing in the barren field, all of a sudden there's this giant tree thing there. So there's Jesus talking, and imagine he's talking in private to his disciples. Here's a trick question. How many apostles were there when he was speaking? Everybody says, it's a trap, I'm not going to say anything. Well, we'd say, if you said 12, you'd be right. But there were really only 11 true apostles, weren't there? One of them was Judas, so we kind of he doesn't count. There might have been 100 people who were true believers. Jesus is talking about this unstoppable kingdom. Mustard plants grow all over the world. He's talking about this unstoppable kingdom, And he's sitting there talking to maybe 100 people at the most who have never been more than 35 miles away from their own home. And he's saying, you are the seed that is going to change the world. Man, it must have just sounded crazy to him. 100 believers to change an entire world. And yet that's exactly what they were. They were the first wave before the diaspora. They were the first wave before the spreading of the seeds. Within 200 years of their time, the entire known world would know the faith. Pretty unstoppable, I'd say. The kingdom of heaven is that seed. The kingdom of heaven is a solid truth of God. It's a reality you can touch and you can feel. It's a fruit that you can consume. It's transformation. There's a barren field and there's a seed. And now there's a giant tree. It's transformed the landscape. That's what the seed of the kingdom does for us. In a spiritual sense, it transforms the landscape of humanity. It's a quick question. Do you ever stop and think of what we wouldn't have if Christianity would never have come to the earth? If there was no Christianity? The whole idea of men and women equal rights comes out of Christianity. The first hospital was a Christian thing. I could go on and on with different things that we take for granted today that come from Christianity. If you want to see something else, if you have a chance to go to a nation that is historically and physically now not Christian, you'll see something very, very different than what you're used to. Christianity transforms outward. It transforms countries, societies, cultures, and hearts of humanity. It's virtually unstoppable. It's unstoppable. So that leaves us in this position. If it's unstoppable, this growing plant, this growing life form, we either join it or we try and eradicate it. We either live in it or we try and escape to somewhere it doesn't exist. John 15:1 says, I am the true vine. My Father is the vine dresser. Abide in me and I in you. As the branch cannot bear fruit by itself unless it bears in the vine, neither can you unless you abide in me. Apart from me, you can do nothing. The kingdom of heaven is nuisance for some. It's life for others. It defies description. It grows everywhere and anywhere, and it transforms. The kingdom of heaven is like a plant that makes more plants. It's a disciple that makes other disciples. The kingdom of heaven is a plant that goes into all the world. The kingdom of heaven is like seeds of light that are sown by the Son of Man. That's the plant. It's the reality of God. Then there's the birds. The birds. And the birds he's talking about are not only the ones that find life in the tree, they are the ones that make their life in the tree. They find shelter, they find community. Hey, anybody ever come around here at the right time of day and hear these, I guess over here, the two evergreens here? It sounds like a sparrow convention. You know, you don't see a thing, but all you can hear is just all this chirping. If you were to go over and shake the tree, about 100 sparrows would come flying out. They have found shelter in there, especially with all the hawks that are starting to populate around here. They found shelter in there. You find a few nests in there. And this plant, this mustard tree is exactly what happens. These branches, they have everything in there. They have a place for shelter. They have a place to build their nest, to live in there. And they have a place to eat because there are seeds that are growing in there. And then an interesting thing happens in there is that if you live in there and you're living in the tree and you eat the seeds, well, then now the tree lives in you. You live in the tree and the tree lives in you. And then you spread it. Interesting thing with these mustard plants, too. I tried to find a biological, scientific list of all the birds that live in mustard trees. Couldn't find it, but I did find a lot of pictures. And it's not surprising. You know what lives in these are little birds, mainly little songbirds and seed eaters. Well, of course, it's filled with seeds. What would you expect? But little tiny songbirds who love to eat seeds live in the tree. And there's a lesson that we could miss in the parable, because how often do you notice a sparrow when you walk by? Every now and then you might look, oh, there's one trying to get under my car or whatever. But usually these little birds are insignificant, aren't they? Do you even slow down walking or driving when you see a little bird? Boom, you just keep going. And yet Jesus uses this plant because these little birds seem insignificant, and yet they are one of the secrets on how they are integral to how it spreads. Little birds, insignificant, so important to that unstoppable growth. I wonder if Paul was thinking that when he was writing to the Corinthians. 1 Corinthians 1:26. For considering your calling, brothers, not many of you were wise according to worldly standards. Not many were powerful. Not many were of noble birth. But God chose what is foolish in the world to shame the wise. God chose what is weak in the world to shame the strong. God chose what is low and small and despised in the world, even things that are not, to bring to nothing things that are, so that no human being might boast in the presence of God. And because of him you are in Christ Jesus, who became to us wisdom from God, righteousness and sanctification and redemption, so that as it is written, let the one who boasts boast in the Lord. Let the little bird boast in the mustard tree. To the little birds that are in that tree, though, it is reality. You can reach out, you can touch, you can feed off that. It's shelter, it's a way of life, it's nourishment. All of this of being in the tree and the tree in them. There's what's important. The tree they are in is in them. Acts 1:8. But you will receive power when the Holy Spirit has come upon you. Not that you simply are in the idea of God, but God is in you. And you will be my witnesses. You will be my witnesses. Just in case I didn't say that clearly. You will be my witnesses in Jerusalem and in all Judea and Samaria and to the ends of the earth. Here's the thing. Those birds couldn't spread a single mustard seed if they never ate them. They couldn't spread mustard seeds if they didn't live in the tree. That's what they had to do. But not all birds live in that tree. Not all birds live in mustard trees. Some of them hover above, so they don't care about the seeds. They want to eat the birds that eat the seeds. They may be animals that they just stop in the shade for a little while when things get hot, and then they're off on their own way doing their own thing. The only wildlife that spreads the seeds, at least directly, are those that live in the tree. They're the only ones. It's an Acts 1:8 principle, but you will receive power when the Holy Spirit has come upon you, and you will be my witnesses. You will be my witnesses, not you will do my witnessing. Wow. You will be my witness, not you will do my witnessing. Well, is it wrong to the act of witnessing? Of course not. But here's one of the great black marks to Christianity is when people try to do witnessing before they became a witness. You have to become, and then you do from what you become. And that's nothing new. We know that. If you're a witness for anything, that's naturally what you are. Take Weight Watchers. If you're a successful witness to Weight Watchers, you don't have to walk around sucking in your tummy, kind of like I'm doing, because you're naturally, that's what you are. You're a thinner version of what you were before. Or if you are a successful witness to Gold's Gym, then maybe you look like Bob and I. We do the Moose Club, but, you don't have to go around trying to pretend and show you have muscle, but you just do. That's what you are. How does that work in the spiritual sense? Well, let me throw a little anecdote out to you if I can. Not that long ago when the kids were coming in, we were chatting with the kids, and we were all talking about when God became real to us. And one of them said, and we asked, well, when did God become real to you? And they said, when we came to this church. Oof. You know what that means? It means when these kids came, they thought God was real, but then they saw people they could see and touch and feel and talk to, and they seemed like the real deal. So God became real because there were people who seemed real in God. Wow, that's sobering, because when you think of the flip side, what happens if they ever discover that's not really true? To be before we do. To be before we do. And in order to be, that takes us right back to what we were saying about this parable. It's the idea of transformation. Everyone in here was a tare, not wheat. Everyone in here was a catfish, not a tilapia. Everyone in here was hard ground that wouldn't take the seed. But there was transformation that happens. And until we become something real, let's not pretend. Discernment is something else little birds need to have, isn't it? Discernment. If you live in a mustard tree and you're a little bird, and you expect to survive, there's a few things you have to discern. Finches love to live in mustard trees, but a finch better know the difference between another finch and a falcon. Or a sparrow better know the difference between another sparrow and an owl, or you're going to be on someone's dinner plate. Now, it's not that the finch condemns the falcon or the sparrow condemns the owl. Condemnation, and we hear that all the time, and I have no right to judge people, true. Condemnation is when we try and take God's seat. Condemnation is when you look at somebody and say, you're not fit for the kingdom of heaven. You will never get there. We can't say that because we don't know who God is transforming. We don't know how he's doing it or where they may be in the process with him. That's God's stuff. But discernment is something we need to have. Discernment is something little birds need to have if they're going to survive in the kingdom of the tree. Matthew 10:16, behold, I am sending you out as sheep in the midst of wolves. But what? So be wise as serpents and innocent as doves. Ephesians 5:6, let no one deceive you with empty words, for because of these things the wrath of God comes upon the sons of disobedience. Therefore do not become partners with them, for at one time you were in darkness, but now you are light in the Lord. Walk as children of light. For the fruit of light, the seeds of light, is found in all that is good and right and true. And try to discern what is pleasing to the Lord. The renowned preacher Charles Spurgeon said this, discernment is not knowing the difference between right and wrong. It's knowing the difference between right and almost right. Discernment is not knowing the difference between right and wrong. It's knowing the difference between right and almost right. There's no shortcut to discernment. There's no shortcut to spiritual wisdom. There's no shortcut to putting down those deep roots. No shortcut to real transformation that takes place. It takes time. It takes living in the tree. And it takes the tree living in you. Transforming the mind takes time in God's Word. And not just a casual reading, but marinating your mind in it. Transforming your heart takes time in prayer. And prayer, you know when real prayer starts? Is when you stop talking to God and start hearing Him. It takes time for transforming our physical lives, our physical habits. And it's a nasty little word we tend to drop off is things are done by fasting and prayer. How does fasting fit in? It doesn't have to be food. Fasting is simply removing anything that is a fog between you and God. For some of us, it's not so much food that we have to worry about. It might be too much TV. It might be too much time on the phone. It might be a schedule that's full of great things, but just no time for God in there at all. And there are obstacles. A simple reality. It works like this. When we stop looking to Christ, we stop seeing Christ. When we stop looking to Christ, we stop seeing Christ. When we stop seeing Christ, we stop transforming. When we stop looking, we stop seeing, we stop transforming. The kingdom of heaven is like a mustard seed. It's like unstoppable growth that some people love it and some people hate it. Some people it's a nuisance, and for others it's life itself. It's transformation outward. One thing is things will never be the same. That's what the kingdom of heaven is like. But every day it leaves us with a question. How much are we like the kingdom? How much are we like the kingdom?